Hello, Scholar Practitioner Leaders, SPLs, Data Scientists. Welcome to our week 5 for the fall 2025 Statistics for Data Science, Section MSDS 531, A01 for our first buy term. I want to take this time out, guys, to congratulate everyone for this past week 4. So it's now week 5, and now we got some other great material that we're going to go over shortly. But before we do that, I want to go back and just piggyback on our previous week 4 because we had 2 phenomenal quizzes that I'm really, really happy about, that everybody did really a great job. It shows me that you guys are really embracing these lectures that I give you, and you're actually reading the material and taking great notes on both the lectures and the reading material in our book, along with any other modules that I give you, like lecture videos, things of that nature. So it looks as though, based on the results of these past 2 quizzes from week 4, it looks like everything is really paying off. So before we jump into this week's material, because you're going to really appreciate this week as well, as far as our expectations of what I'm expecting from you as an output for assignments, you're going to really like what we have ahead of us. But before we do that, let's go ahead and go over last week's week 4 material, okay? Because I want to make sure that everything that I spoke on actually did in fact come to fruition, and you guys was really receptive to that based on your scoring. So let's go ahead and go over my deliverables. And we all know that my deliverables is always going to be derived from the overview for the week, which is in our content folder for that respective week. And in this case, it was week 4. Okay. All righty. So you remember what I mentioned last week about the common goal in statistics is to answer the question, is the X variable associated with the Y variable? Okay. And if so, what is the relationship, and can we use it to actually predict Y? The prediction of the outcome, which we know now is the target, right? The target variable based on the values of the other predictive variables, okay? So in data science, data scientists, the most important use of regression is to predict some dependent outcome, okay, variable, in order to understand the nature of the relationship between predictors and the outcome, okay? And that's crucial, as you guys saw from this past week 4, based on the reading material and the lecture that I gave you last week. The relationship between the response and a predictor variable isn't necessarily linear, okay? No, remember the example that I gave you in regard to the drug dosage, right? I stated last week the response to the drug is often linear. A response to any drug is often nonlinear, excuse me. It's always nonlinear when you have a response to a drug, because when you double the dosage, generally it doesn't lead to a double response. So you remember the actual example that I gave you last week when I spoke on aspirin, okay? Just because you double and triple the amount of aspirin, it doesn't give you a double response. It's still going to always be nonlinear. Just because you take a whole bunch of them, it's not going to give you, if anything, it's just going to be a linear response, just a straight path, right? So always remember, guys, as I spoke on, that when you double the amount, you're never really going to have that double response, okay? It's always going to be non-linear. Typically, any type of drug that you take, okay? Especially when you're taking the right amount. So that's what I spoke on last week. And I also discussed that with my wife. By the way, my wife is actually a nurse, orthopedic nurse. So when I told her about that, we actually did a little research on it, and she was quite impressed with that saying when it comes to drugs being non-linear, right? Just because you double that response, or double the dosage, doesn't give you that double response. So we know that. So you don't get more of a power effect. It's still going to be just always non-linear. So my wife, the orthopedic nurse, really appreciated that. So, and she was quite impressed. It's not often that I talk to her about medical things in the type of work that I do. So that's the reason why she was impressed. Okay, so we know now that that overview that I just gave you guys, I always paraphrase our actual overview because that's going to be my deliverables by the week, things that you should have in your hip pocket that you should know inside and out, especially that example that I just gave you and the other things that I mentioned in regard to the common goal in statistics is to answer the question, the variable y is associated with the variable y. And if so, what is the relationship that we can use to predict y, right? So that was the whole premise last week of working in chapter 4. As you guys read and took great notes on, along with my lecture, you should have been good to go. And I'm hoping, based on the scoring that I saw on the quizzes, because I didn't have to check anything this week. So I saw you guys' score, and it looks like all the note taking, reading the chapters, taking great notes from both of our electronic books, the one that you guys have in your course materials, and the embedded link book inside the respective week's material. You guys was good to go. So that was good for the module deliverables. And then we had those 6 module objectives. Okay, so by the week's end, you had to do number 1, find the slope and intercept for linear regression. That was number 1. Number 2 was you had to calculate performance that I mentioned last week. Calculate performance metrics for multiple linear regression. Number 3 was converting the factor variables into numeric variables. Number 4 was interpreting linear regression equations. Okay, and you guys saw that from your readings, saw the examples in the book, and then your quiz also had an example on that as well. Okay, and then also you had to diagnose linear regression, and then last but not least, as a part of the module deliverables for chapter 4, you had to describe polynomial regression. Okay, and that was the icing in the cake as far as module objectives to coincide with those deliverable items that I gave you that I spoke on in the previous overview. Okay, so week 4, along with my lecture, should have been uh, nicely put together for you guys that really guided you for taking the 2 quizzes that we're going to talk about in lecture 2 or 4 coming up next. But as long as you listen to my lecture, understood the deliverables that I was expecting that I put out there on our announcement board, and making sure that you took care of all your module objectives, those 6 items, you should have been really, really good to go on the quiz. And there was a little carryover from week 3 as well, as I mentioned last week. But then also in chapter 4, okay, in chapter 4 from our book, our regular book, our electronic book, the Practical Statistics for Data Science, regression and prediction section, there was those 7 regression items that I told you that you had to make sure that you're able to differentiate and how to use those. Those 7 were that I spoke on probably about 4 or 5 times last week because I was really adamant, wanted to make sure that you guys actually understood how to differentiate those because I knew you was going to see those on the quiz, right? So if you nailed that, then the quiz would have been really straightforward for you and you would have had no ambiguity, no uncertainty on the quiz. So the first one was making sure that you understood simple linear regression. Okay. 2 of 6 was making sure that, hey, I know exactly what multiple linear regression is, and I know how to differentiate multiple linear regression from simple linear regression. Thirdly was the predictor or the prediction using regression. Okay, so the prediction using regression was the 3rd item. Fourthly was factor variables in regression. Okay, and then the 5th item of 7 was making sure that you're able to be able to do the interpreting the regression equation. You guys saw that in the book that was also on your quiz to make sure that you was able to do the actual interpreting the regression equation, right? That's really making sure that you understand those regression equations. You got to be able to interpret it, right? So that was really huge. And then the sixth item was making sure that regression diagnostics is being applied properly. So the book breaks all of these areas down very granularly, just like they did on this last one, 7 to 7. The polynomial and spline regression was the last form of regression that you guys had to make sure that you had in your hip pocket and understood in their entirety. Okay, that's what I was expecting uh, from last week to really bode well for you on the quiz. And from what I can see, it looks like it truly did. So you guys never cease to amaze me. Truly, I'm really impressed. And then also we had one other section to tie in with the quiz as well. You had to click on the embedded link here in this week 4, the modern statistics with the R link for section 8. That was called, that I want you to look at because it tied in all the different types of regression, was that regressions model section in section 8 for the modern statistics with an R link. Okay. All you had to do was go through, take great notes on that, understand how those models coincide with each of those regressions, and you would have been good to go. So I felt comfortable that I gave you just enough of material that you needed because a lot of this came segued from week 3 as well. So there was a little carryover, as I told you, on the quiz because we had 2 quizzes, and I'll go over those in the next lecture, lecture 2 or 4. But as I spoke on last week, these 7 items, along with the material here in week 4, also, there's a little carryover from week 3 as well. We're all going to be on the quiz. And as you saw, hey, Dr. Mark was actually right. It is everything he talked about literally on the quiz. So as long as you know how to tie in that regression model with those 7 other forms of regression, you would have been okay because the model actually showed you how they all tied in together. And that's what the models was all about. So that was pretty cool. And that was a way to get you even better understanding on how to actually differentiate the different forms of regression. Okay. And then also there's some supplemental material. If you guys want to take it to another level, do some things, some practice things on your own. I'm always advocating, hey, if you want to do some supplemental material, feel free to do a deep dive. It's there for you to give you some extra things outside of what I've already given you. And sometimes, I may give you a lot of material, but it may not be enough for you. Like Dr. Mark thinks he's really giving me a lot, but I need some more. So thus the nickname Dr. Moore, right? And that's the reason why, because those supplemental materials also has my back, just in case you feel like I'm not giving you enough. Well, jump into my supplemental material. That's for you as well to give you some extra insight on regression, as you can see for the quiz. Okay, so those quizzes for chapter 4, and it reinforces everything in regard to the my deliverables that I posted on the announcement board. As you guys saw my announcement that I presented to you guys, along with the week's content material, those 6 items that you also needed to make sure that you understand those, actually understood those content modules of the module content. Okay. All righty, guys. So for me, as I'm looking here in our first lecture, 1 of 4, it looks like everything was good. And as far as housekeeping items, trying to think, is there anything that I want to tell you guys before we come back to lecture 2 or 4? Because on the next lecture, we're going to be totally engulfed in the quiz. Well, I do want to make sure that you guys are keeping your head of steam. Do not take your foot off the pedal. Keep doing what you're doing. Be on time with your assignments. Do not be late at all because you don't want to lose points. Because if you're late, you get 0 points. And those assignments can be worth up to like 80 points, 70 points, 35 points, okay? And those are easy points that you can always accumulate by just being on time, okay? And there you go. So that's my housekeeping items that I want to mention to you. Be on time, be professional, continue being the scholar practitioner leaders that you guys are. Okay, keep up the great work. I'll see you guys in lecture 2 of 4 in a second. Bye bye.